Well, good evening. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate Caden praying for me to have a recollection of what I've prepared, because today has been some kind of day. I forgot about the time change coming down here, so I was supposed to get here about 2 hours before church started, and with missing the time change and then getting out a little later than I meant to anyway, I got here about 20 minutes before church started. So yeah, it's been a day. I've had a lot to get done, and time just slipped away from me. But I do know some of you here, a lot of you I don't. I may have been here maybe when I was a kid. I truthfully can't remember. Some of you may know my dad, Rodney. He preached in Cleveland for a little over a decade. That's where I was born, and he's been in Cookeville for 22 years now. So hard to believe we've been in Cookeville twice as long as we were in that we were in Cleveland. But I will say I don't know how I ended up on Nick's radar to do this, because
we were struggling to get those.
I am not a preacher. That's my dad's thing, but hopefully I've got something. If I can even remember what I've prepared, hopefully I have something that will be of some benefit to you. I will. You know, it's funny. I'm a sentimental person. Just that it's a Pitts thing. We're sentimental people, and the first day that I started preparing for this lesson, thinking about, the angels and Nick, I probably sat there and reminisced as much as I actually worked on my sermon that first day. And because the angels were there, I mean, from the day I was born, they were there in Cleveland. And so Nick and a couple others at the church there, they were my first friends, and so me and Nick especially grew up together in every sense of the phrase for the first 11 years of my life. And it's funny, as I sat there and I reminisced and thinking back on my childhood and very fond memories of my time in Cleveland. It's funny that some of the stuff, that the memories that came back were things that weren't even big. They were just they were pretty mundane. One of my most vivid memories of Nick, and I'm sure Nick has zero recollection of this, but I remember I remember the summer of 2001, so well over 20 years ago now. It was a Sunday afternoon. We'd been in Chattanooga, and we were driving down 58 out of Chattanooga. We were in the Harrison Bay area right there, and for some reason Nick had been with us. I don't even know what we had been doing, but Nick was with us. Me and Nick were sitting in the back of my parents' 1995 Ford Windstar. He had his Sony Walkman CD player, and I had one earbud in, he had the other, and we were listening to, and this was the funny part, because we were listening to The World's Greatest by R. Kelly. The Muhammad Ali movie came out that summer, and that song was like one of the main songs from it, and it ended up being a pretty big radio hit. I remember sitting there. That is one of my most vivid memories of Nick, and I have no idea why. But also, Nick had I guess a short-lived football career at Ocoee Middle School, and I remember Nick coming in on Wednesday night after football practice, unshowered, and me and Nick a lot of the time sat by each other in church. And you know that when you like maybe bite the inside of your gums or your tongue or something like that, you can taste the iron in your blood. That's what Nick smelled like when he would come in after. And I remember I can still smell it to this day. So well over 20 years later, I still remember that. But yeah, my family suffered a pretty severe tragedy back in March of 2020, and so I was a sentimental person before then. I'm that much more of a sentimental person now, and I was just sitting there thinking about all that stuff. I can't tell you how many times, especially over the last 5 years, that I've just thought, Lord, give me one more day to go back and just live any day from the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. Give me one day to go back and experience that life again, because my childhood in Cleveland, I loved it. We were not happy when Dad decided to uproot and move to Cookeville, and it is funny. Cookeville has finally become home, but probably until the time I was in college, I still planned on, once I got into my career, moving back over here more towards East Tennessee, moving back to Cleveland. So I have really fond memories of East Tennessee. Of course, I went to UT, and if I hadn't had the misfortune of graduating in the middle of COVID, I didn't have intentions of leaving. Did I turn this on? Yes, it's on. But I didn't have any intentions of leaving East Tennessee. I planned on staying in Knoxville, but COVID and life had other plans. So, but yes, with that maybe somewhat lengthy introduction, again, I do appreciate Nick asking me to be here. I hope I have something of value for you tonight. And I will say I did prepare this with the thought more of this being more of like a class. So I prepared this hoping to have your comments if you feel comfortable doing that. There will be times throughout this that I would love to have your comments. I do not consider myself to be a talented class teacher and especially preacher, but if I had to choose one of the two, I prefer to teach a class. So if you have any thoughts, I would love to have those. Raise your hand. I'll try to keep an eye out. But with that, of course, tonight we're talking about Enoch, and this is it is interesting. Just a few weeks ago, I taught a class on Thomas back home, and that's twice now I have chosen a subject to teach on that I have very little verses about. We don't know much about Thomas. We don't know a ton about Enoch. There are just very few passages throughout the Bible that give us any glimpse into their lives. And so when I got into Enoch, I realized I had the same problem that I had teaching Thomas, just that there's not that much text about them. So not to say we're thinking too far outside of the box here, but there's maybe a little bit left for some discussion. Maybe we end up filling in the blanks a little bit. Not trying to get extra biblical or anything like that, but yeah, that's we just have a few verses here and there throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that's the plan for this evening. We'll walk through those and see what we can figure out, see what we can learn from Enoch. And it's my understanding that y'all started this study of Hebrews 11, kind of the Hall of Fame of Faith, last week, and so I believe y'all discussed Abel last week. And so now we're going on to the second in that list, which is Enoch. And I would submit that, kind of going along with what I said about Thomas, in this whole list of Hebrews 11, we probably know less about Enoch than we do anybody else in that list. So again, we have about 3 different scriptures, just a few verses to read from this evening and to see what we can learn from that. So we don't have a ton, and I'll try to I will try to get y'all out of here as quickly as possible. So, but I just started running a timer on my phone because I don't want to leave y'all here. I guess even though this is not what I do, I don't have any problems filling in any amount of time I have. So I guess that's something I get from my dad. He can certainly be long-winded. So he's never been accused of preaching short sermons. So this evening we'll just start right into it. Is this it? Yeah. So, like I said, I prepared this more with this being a class, and so my very next slide is a bit of a discussion slide, and again, we don't know that much about Enoch, but I wanted to open it up for a second, just on a very surface level. What do we know? What do we know about Enoch? from the three different passages we have, what do we know about Enoch? Yeah.
Wasn't he one of Abraham's bloodline?
I believe so, yes. That I didn't go that far into the genealogy, but I believe you're correct on that. Because he had Methuselah, and I believe Methuselah was in the bloodline of Abraham and ultimately Christ, I believe, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure on the genealogy. What else do we know about Enoch?
Well, probably the most famous, he didn't die.
Yes. That's what we all know Enoch for, is that he didn't die. He was taken up by God. And we're going to talk about that tonight. What that means, we don't necessarily know. What that looked like. Did he have any warning? No idea. But yeah, that's what we most remember Enoch for, was that he didn't die. He was taken up by God. And why was that? Why was he taken up by God? Yes, he was very righteous. He was a very righteous person, one of, I believe, two people in the Old Testament that were taken up by God. And it is interesting, and we'll get into this more later. It's interesting that we have a person that was so righteous that he was taken up by God, yet we know so little about him. I do find that interesting. Anything else, just on a very broad surface level, that we know about Enoch? I'll be honest with you, that's really all I had as far as this broad surface level. So I think we've covered all our bases to get into the actual text tonight. But there are three, excluding genealogies, which I should have looked at that a little bit more. Excluding genealogies, there are three passages we have about Enoch in the entirety of the Bible. Those are Hebrews 11, 5, and 6, Genesis 5, 21 through 24, and then Jude 14 and 15. That's really all we have as far as anything substantive about Enoch. So that's where we're going to spend our time tonight. With that, I think what we'll do, the way my slides are laid out, I believe what we'll do is we'll just go through and we'll read all three of those scriptures back to back, and then we'll go through each one and talk about each one in a bit more detail. So we'll start off with that. I don't mind reading these, but if we have anybody here that would like to read, that's up here. Can I get is there anybody that would potentially want to read that? All right, thank you. Moving on to Genesis 5. Can I get a reader for that?
Enoch was 65 years old when he fathered Methuselah, and after he fathered Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and fathered other sons and daughters. So Enoch's life lasted 365 years. Enoch walked with God. Then he was not there because God took him.
All right, thank you. Last one, Jude 14 and 15. Can I get a reader for that?
About these, Enoch in the seventh generation from Adam prophesied, look, the Lord comes with tens of thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, to convict all the ungodly concerning all the ungodly acts that they have done in an ungodly way, concerning all harsh things ungodly sinners have said against him.
All right, thank you. So those are the three we have. Those are the three passages we're going to be looking at tonight. So we'll go back now to Hebrews 11. We'll start here. We'll see what we can learn from this, and then we'll move on to the other two. So we have this passage in Hebrews 11, which we don't know that much about Enoch personally, except that he was taken up. But we do. This is one of the few verses we have, and so. Just broadly speaking of the context of Hebrews 11, kind of this hall of fame of faithful individuals that we have, this is, let's not forget the context of Hebrews here. Was Hebrews written to a group of very encouraged Christians, or was it written to a group of discouraged Christians? You can probably tell by the way I ask it if you didn't already know. It's a group of discouraged Christians, and there was a couple reasons for that. One, they were facing severe persecution, and they were also facing some temptations to go back to Judaism, back to the old law. And so I feel like that context is important for us to remember as we're looking not just at Enoch, but at this list as a whole. This is a list that where presumably Paul is trying to encourage them, and so that's the kind of the context we have for this list here. And I would say that looking back at the Hebrews as a whole, the start of Hebrews, assuming Paul wrote Hebrews, he spends a lot of time, especially at the beginning of the book, establishing the superiority of Christ, to encourage them that way, to kind of make a defense of Christianity and Christ, and in these temptations they were having to go back to Judaism and the old law, which is similar to Colossians. We'll look at Colossians a little bit tonight, but that's kind of the context we have for Hebrews here as we start this study of Enoch tonight. And so going back to the actual scripture here, another little bit of a discussion question. We've already talked very broadly about what we know about Enoch, and I don't think there's a ton here that we don't have already established, but very quickly, what do we learn about Enoch in this passage? And again, did you have your hand up? I believe that, yes. I believe, there were more than one. So, I believe so. Yes. So, but what about? And we've already talked about it. What do we specifically from this Hebrews chapter 11? What do we learn about Enoch here? We've already talked about it.
Pays to be faithful.
Yeah, pays to be faithful, and what act happened to Enoch that
I would say that he went up to heaven without dying.
Yes, he was taken up, and he was taken up because he pleased God, but not only did he please God, it said that. What does it say? What does it say about? Was he? I don't know, maybe honored the right word? What does it say? Was it just left unspoken?
In my version it said, for he had a testimony given to him that before he was taken up, he had been well pleased with God.
Yes, and that's what I'm getting at. My version, which I use the ESV, it says he was commended. Yours says testimony. Mine says, now before he was taken up, he was commended as having pleased God. And I don't want to, approved. Okay, what translation do you have? Okay, so different wording there, but somehow, some way, and we don't know exactly how this happened, but he was commended. Was it an angel? Was it in a vision? Don't know what this looked like, but he was righteous enough, he pleased God enough that in some way he was commended by God for having to do that. Can that happen to us today? Are we going to have an angel come down to us and tell us that we've been pleasing? No, it's rhetorical. To ask it, is to answer it. But, one thing I don't want to get lost in this discussion tonight is that, on Judgment Day, we can have this commendation. And that's something we don't need to forget as we live our Christian lives. I know we can all suffer, horrendous things. We can have discouraging times. But on Judgment Day, we can have this same commendation to our lives if we do what we need to do on this earth to live a life that would be pleasing to God. So that's kind of what we have here in Hebrews. We know that he was taken up. We know that he pleased God. We also know that he was commended for having pleased God. And then, of course, the last half of that verse we're going to talk about a little bit more. But with that, I want to move on to not just focusing in on Enoch, but what applications can we learn from this scripture to what applications can we make to our lives from this? And again, this gets into the latter half of that verses 5 and 6, which I'll go ahead and read again. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So what applications, maybe just started off that way, opening it up a little bit, what applications do you have that you can think of that we can learn from this passage? Yeah, Nick.
I don't know if I've ever tangibly made the connection of verse 6 to Enoch before. You know, depending on the top set of your Bible, sometimes the Bible's verse by verse, so every verse stands on its own. Some Bibles are like mine that have kind of paragraphs that combine thoughts. And 5 and 6 are put together in the same paragraph here. And again, I don't know if I've ever noticed it, but what is mentioned in verse 6 plays right off of what's given in verse 5. It says that, yeah, he was approved as one who pleased God. And immediately, the Hebrew writer says, now without faith, it is impossible to please God.
Yes.
For the one who draws near to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. What that tells me is maybe a little more detail, still general in nature, but a little bit more detail about Enoch's life, that he seems to have been someone who believed God existed, and he believed that God would reward him for seeking him.
Exactly, yes, and that's what the main thing I wanted to talk about in this application section. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. So pulling back out a little bit, what is a necessary predicate to pleasing God? What does it say is a faith? Okay, so faith, we have faith. We cannot please God if we don't have faith. But in turn, what are the two, this scripture here states that there are two beliefs that proper faith requires. What are those two? Which Nick already mentioned them. But, and this was a kind of an eye-opening moment for me because I'd never thought of it this way. But what are the two predicates necessary for a proper faith that it says there? Belief that God exists, that's the first one. The second one, and that he rewards those who seek him. That was, I spent a lot of time thinking about that because this is a scripture to me that's easy to gloss over. And I think the first part is pretty inherent. We understand that. So that first part, believing that God exists, the lesson book that y'all are working on, that these studies come from, points out that this isn't simply that you believe God exists. Rather, this is I use the ESV and have for years, but in this particular passage, I actually prefer the New King James Version, which I don't have a slide for that, but the New King James Version says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is." It doesn't just say believes that, it doesn't say must believe that he exists, must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those. We have the rest of that there. So Matthew Allen in the book stated it this way: rather it is an acknowledgement that he is who he is, the only true God. God is not just one of many gods, he is the God. It's not you run into a lot of people in the world that believe God exists, but they let it have zero effect on their lives. And so this is a bit more than just, oh yeah, I believe God exists. This is a belief that he is who he says he is, and that's going to lead your life, and that you are going to form your life into the instructions and patterns that are set for us. But again, the part that really struck me is the next part. You have this believe that God exists, but also the second part, and it seems less important. It doesn't seem to be to sit on the same pedestal as the first one, but they're mentioned as both being required for a proper faith, and we have to believe that He rewards those who seek Him. And I mean, how often do you think about that? Do you really think about that in your life as part of your faith, that in order for you to have a faith that you should, you have to believe that He is going to reward you for living as you should? And that's something, I'm ashamed to say, I have glossed over that my entire life. I had never made that application to that. Any thoughts on that second portion there? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I get to talking and.
But it's, well, first, there's two comments. It seems like Enoch, you were setting Enoch up in this chapter as an example, the example for verse 6, like Nick already said.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we forget about that.
Why not put it at the very beginning? Why connect it with Enoch? It has to be because he is the example.
Yeah.
And his reward, he didn't die. He was taken up to heaven. Taken with God because he walked with God. And then my second point was, it's not just a casual, I'm going to look around and see if I can find God. It's work. It's diligently seeking after. He's a rewarder of those who diligently or earnestly seek after.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
We have to put in our work so that you will get the reward. Absolutely. Yeah, and so, before we move on from this particular point, I did want to take us to Colossians 1, verses 9 through 14. I think we see a lot of the same themes here, and I'll go ahead and read that. And so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Remember that part right there, because that'll tie into the other scriptures we'll be looking at tonight. But walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints of His light. We see that reward there. And that He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Again, going to that reward that we have, that going back to believing that He will reward, having that faith that He will reward those who diligently seek Him. So we see those same kind of themes here in Colossians 1 that we also see here in Hebrews 11. Nick, did you start to put your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was agreeing with you. Think about the whole idea of seeking God. Reminds me of Paul in Athens. There were many people who were very religious, but they were not pursuing God in the way in which they could find, because they weren't pursuing Him according to the reality of who He was.
Right.
They were, as you mentioned earlier, accounting Him as just one God among many gods. But if you're pursuing God in that way, you're never going to find Him, because you're not giving Him the proper respect that's due Him.
Exactly.
This says that you've got to have the proper knowledge of God, and then that put together, we're seeking Him is going to actually accomplish.
Yeah. So I hope nobody in here finds themselves in this position tonight, but I'm sure every single one of us here that has been baptized into Christ, have you ever doubted your position before God? I have. Done things I shouldn't have done. We've all, at times, had those doubts, and sometimes they were exactly how we needed to be thinking about our lives. If we weren't living the way we should be having doubts. But if you're having doubts about your life, there are two options. If you're doubting your position before God, you have two options, and two options only. One, maybe you have reason to doubt because you haven't been living the way you should, in which case you need to get your life right with God. Or, and this is going back more to verse 6, if you do find yourself in God's grace, meaning you have no justification to doubt, if you're still having trouble believing in that reward, maybe you need to work on your faith. If you don't have a justification, if you can't point to anything in your life to say, I messed up here, I've not been forgiven, if you haven't been living your life the way you should, if that's not an issue, if you feel that, if you've been living your life the way you should and you're still having doubts, as blunt as this is, you need to work on your faith. And that's as much to me as it is to any of y'all, because this passage really, verse 6, really hit me, because I'd never really thought of it in that way. So again, if you have no justification for doubting your faith, if you are living the way you should and you're still doubting, you need to work on your faith, because believing in that reward is a necessary part of your faith. You shouldn't be sitting there as a child of God living the way you should. Now, not to say any of us are perfect, because we're not. If you're living there, if you're living the way you should and you're still doubting yourself, maybe it's a personal issue. Some people suffer more from self-doubt. But you need to work on your faith, because that's a necessary part of your faith if you're still having those doubts. Yeah, Nick.
We don't have faith in the reward, then we don't have faith in the rewarder. And that's
Yes.
really what it comes down to.
Yep.
You're talking about
Yep.
you need to work on our faith. Work in your understanding of God.
Yes.
You truly believe He is who He is. You believe that He has said what He has said. You believe that He's promised what He has promised. And the number of times that Paul especially emphasizes the promises of God and the need to believe them and trust in them is numerous throughout his letters. Because even like you say, even if we're doing the right things, we're still not going to be perfect in that. So where is our confidence in our salvation? Is our confidence in our own doing? Well, that's never going to get us anywhere. So our confidence has to be in Him.
Yeah.
That He does reward those who truly trust Him and that truly have faith.
It's more of a thought question than anything, but I have, because I don't have an answer. It's just something I have thought about a lot in my own life. Have you ever sinned and you pray for forgiveness over and over and over and over again for the same instance? I know I have. And I don't know the answer to that. But sometimes I ask myself, do I have the proper faith in God if I'm praying over and over and over again for forgiveness for the same sin? I'm talking about the same instance. I am asking for forgiveness for this act on this day, and if I do it over, then I don't know. That's something I probably shouldn't even brought it up, because I don't have an answer for it. But it is something I've thought about a lot in my life. Should I be praying for forgiveness? If I have truly sought God's forgiveness, and I believe that He has forgiven me, should I be praying for that over and over again? I don't know, but again, going back to our discussion of this reward, if you're having these doubts and you don't have justification for it, you do well to remind yourself to embrace His promises and to remember the rewards that will be available to you in the end. Last thing I really wanted to spend on this a little bit, 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9, we see that these rewards are predicated on seeking Him. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father and serve Him with a whole heart and a willing mind, for the Lord searches all hearts and understands every intent of the thoughts. If you seek Him, He will let you find Him, but if you forsake Him, He will reject you forever. So we see pretty strong language on that. Yes?
One of the things I was going to say, at least in regards to the point in Hebrews, and it ties in with Paul's discourse on Mars, is that remember what they were doing, what the Christians had at that time with other religions, with the Greek or Roman gods. They have what was the character of these imaginary beings that they worship? They were cruel.
Yes.
Did they care if what happened to man? No. That was, of course, this is sort of problematical in that it didn't matter because it didn't exist. but what people believed
Yes. Yeah.
they did was that men were just things that they could wreak their petty irritation on,
Mhm.
or puzzle them, or do whatever they wanted. So that because they were manufactured by men, basically they created gods in their own image.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yep.
so
They had human qualities, human
this is
faults.
different. Not only do they need to believe in God, but that by him being a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, he wants us to come to him.
Yes.
He
Yes.
truly desires this, and he loves us. And it's something that sometimes we still continue to anthropomorphize God, because when the person says, I am unworthy to come into God's presence, therefore I am too ashamed to approach him.
Yes.
And there are several layers right here. We do not know, or we cannot appreciate how good God is. He's not like us.
Exactly.
How much God loves us, because he is not like us.
Mhm.
And we can be set in our ways and say, I am never going to forgive you for what you have just done. And God's not like us.
Yes.
And so, if we turn this back around and say, well, what was Enoch experiencing? It was worse. We're coming into the end of mankind's days, except for 8 souls.
Yes.
And what was the characteristic of the time that Enoch lived in? You know, we talk about peer pressure.
Yeah.
The thought of man's heart was evil continually.
And we,
That's why I think you see in Jude this statement of all the righteous acts that they have ungodly committed, and all the ungodliness that the Lord will come with his saints to render justice on them. And indeed he did.
yeah.
He wiped them all out except for me.
Yes. Yep. And we will talk about that a bit more, as you say, once we get into Jude. You know, we see this, the world was only growing more evil continually, and we see what Enoch, to his credit, we see his reaction to that. Last thing I had here, and this is more maybe my own personal way of thinking, you know, and this is applicable to you know, this entire study, just the fact that we don't know much about Enoch. We have a person that was so righteous that he was taken up by God, yet substantively we have 3 different passages to learn from. And, you know, obviously there were many, you know, the 99.9+% of what Enoch did in his life went unrecorded for us. And so I think we can definitely argue that in our own human way of thinking that he didn't get the recognition he deserved, yet he was worthy enough to be taken by God and to be later mentioned thousands of years later in Hebrews chapter 11, or well, I didn't do the math on that, but being mentioned despite knowing very little about him in our recorded the scriptures we have recorded for us. He was still worthy of being mentioned there. But, you know, again, it seems like we could definitely argue that maybe he didn't receive the credit he deserved in our own earthly way of thinking. But, you know, one thing in relation to that I do want us to think about before we move on is that, you know, maybe this will change a little bit due to the digital age we live in. But by and large, every single person in this room, regardless of what your age is right now, with the potential exception of family, at least for a time, every single person in this room, once we die, will be remembered for a few generations at most, and that's it. As far as lasting legacy on this earth, earthly accomplishments, we're not going to be remembered more than a few generations. We will, as far as the world is concerned, we will have not existed. There will be no memory of us. And one thing I think about, I had a great-grandfather he passed away just a few months after I was born. So that was just a little over 30 years ago, and I suspect that 95+% of the people that even knows he ever walked this earth are within our family. Nobody else remembers him. And, that could be, if your hope is here, that could be a discouraging thought to you. Unless you're an Elon Musk or somebody like that, you're not going to be remembered more than a few generations. And, but while we may not be remembered here on this earth, just like Enoch, you know who will remember us? If we live, we'll be remembered regardless. But who won't remember, won't forget us? God's not going to forget us. Exactly. Thank you. Yes, God's not going to forget us. And hopefully every person here in this room will be remembered by God for having lived the life they should have lived. And I think that's a really, really beautiful hope we have in that. In that regardless of whether we receive any recognition on this earth for worldly things or even spiritual things, if we live the way we should, if we follow the example of Enoch, we will be remembered by God in the end. And so, like Ecclesiastes says, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. If your hope is here, if you're hoping to be remembered on this earth for your worldly accomplishments, your hope is in the wrong place. And so all we should need to be worried about is our walk with God and making sure that we are remembered in a good way, remembered by God as having pleased Him. So yeah, I think that's a maybe more tangential point, but I did want to discuss that before we moved on. These next two will be much shorter. Genesis 5:21 through 24. Of course, we've already read that. Enoch was 65 years old when he fathered Methuselah. And after he fathered Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and fathered other sons and daughters, but Enoch's life lasted 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was not there because God took him. Anything really different we learn here? Not a whole lot. Yes. Yeah. Yes. You look at his father, Jared, 962 years. Look at his son, Methuselah, 965 years. Do I have that right? Okay. So he lived a relatively short life at only 365 years. But do I? Yes, a year for every day. Yes. And there would have been a time I would have loved to do something like that. But the older you get, it's like, maybe a time where an expiration will be welcome at some point. When you're a kid, the thought of living forever is something that, that would be great. And as you get older, I think you realize maybe that's not as great as you thought as a kid. But yes, he was young he was young compared to those around him. He walked with God. This is we've already talked about this, but this is a scripture that is only used in relation to 3 other men in the Bible. If I've done my research right, you got Noah in Genesis 6, Abraham in Genesis 17 and 24, and then Isaac in Genesis 48. He was so faithful that God took him. We've already talked a lot about this. We don't know what the circumstances were, so we're kind of left to speculate on that. I don't know Hebrew, but Matthew Allen states that this Hebrew word indicates a sudden disappearance. So we're kind of left to speculate. I think it's kind of interesting to think about. Did he and his family have any warning? Was he off by himself and was just they had no idea where he went? I don't know what that looked like. Did he simply disappear? Was he kind of taken up into the clouds, his physical body taken up? Don't know, but that's we're just kind of left to speculate on that. Don't have, kind of following the same structure here, any applications from this passage that we can make to our own lives? Yeah.
So he lived for hundreds of years, which makes me think that he was faithful for that long.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that for us, we live 70, 80 years, 90 years, lucky. You got to remain faithful for all that time.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep. And, I would hope that for these people, Jared Methuselah that lived almost 1,000 years, I would hope that became something easier to do, as you get older, and maybe they were less susceptible to peer pressure and everything. But I think if they struggle as much at times with everyday life and sin and temptation as much as we can at times, would you want to live that long? Because that's a whole lot more time to mess up, But yeah. Going along with that, it mentions walking with God. And I think, one thing we can learn from that is that although it doesn't say it specifically, that's a daily commitment and that's a daily devotion on our lives. We see that from Hebrews 11:6, diligently seeking Him. So this isn't a part-time job. Yeah.
But it also mentions Adam walking with God in the garden before they took the forbidden fruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it started with Adam walking with God until he sinned, but then now we see here Enoch walking with God.
Yeah.
In a probably a different way, but
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Good point. I did want to read. I've got one paragraph here from Matthew Allen. I really liked his insight into a few of these things. He says in relation to this Genesis 5 passage, he says, "What does it mean to walk with God?" Actually, I have this up here. What does it mean to walk with God? It refers to a step-by-step fellowship or daily communion. This is what is involved in salvation. Because Noah walked with God, he escaped judgment. Because Abraham walked with God, he received blessing. Because Enoch walked with God, he escaped death. Enoch is the illustration of salvation's great promise, that is, eternal life in heaven. We have been promised that we will be delivered from our world of sin, decay, disease, and death, and enter the presence of the Lord. And to that I can only say, amen. Any other applications we can make from this before we go to our last passage for the evening? All right, another very short one, Jude 14 and 15. It was about these that Enoch and the seventh generation from Adam prophesied, "Look, the Lord comes with tens of thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly concerning all the ungodly acts that they have done in an ungodly way, and concerning all the harsh things ungodly sinners have said against them." That passage is brought to you by the ungodly. How many times does it say it? Ungodly, what, 5, 6 times right there? So, but yeah, what can we learn? What can we learn, same as we've done with the other passages? What do we learn about Enoch here in Jude? And I'll go back so we have it up there in front of us. I should have been doing that for all the other passages. But what do we learn about Enoch there? Maybe that's a little different than before.
it looks like he was, this is the only instance we have of Enoch telling him what he was prophesying, teaching.
Yes.
So obviously he was teaching in that ungodly generation for sure this, and I'm sure a lot of other things that we don't have recorded.
Yes. This is by far the most personal passage we have about Enoch in the entirety of the Bible. And so with that, I guess you can assume, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but he prophesied, so I guess you could assume he was a prophet, which maybe we don't generally think of Enoch as a prophet. I think, when we think of Enoch, we're almost exclusively in the mindset of just knowing that he was taken up by God. That's what we remember about him most. But it seems he was a prophet. As we talked about earlier, he lived at a time when the world was only growing more continually evil. And so, from the days of Enoch until the days of Noah, the world just kept getting worse and worse and worse until God ultimately decided that he would destroy the world through the flood, except for the 8 souls. And so, but what do we learn about Enoch? Despite the accelerating evil and moral decay of the world around him, what did Enoch continue to do? Yes. Mm-hmm. And did he try?
Well, let's say, in addition to that, notice what this emphasizes, though. So Hebrews 11:6 emphasizes the reward for the faithful. This emphasizes the judgment of the ungodly.
Yes.
So both sides
Yes.
of the coin.
Yes. So you do have that play off of each other here. So Enoch continued to believe despite the wickedness of the world around him. And did he sit back and just let it ride, or did he continue to teach and try to convince those around him? He did. He continued to warn those around him of the coming judgment, and on the ultimate reward, although not a reward they would want, the ultimate consequence of the world's ungodly ways. So this was something that Enoch continued to do throughout his time. Yeah, Nick.
Another parallel with Noah is, you said Noah is described as having walked with God, and in Hebrews 11:7 it talks about through that he condemned the world through what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Here's Enoch doing the same thing. He walked with God and then also condemned the world.
Yes, yes.
A number of parallels that show up.
Absolutely.
First Peter, Moses was called a preacher of righteousness.
Yep.
Similar to here, being Enoch being a prophet.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking the words of God being wrong.
Yep. So last point I have really on this, again, what applications can we make? And I think we've already started discussing that. The command we have to, as Enoch practiced in trying to warn those around him, is that something that's required of us, or can we just sit back on our haunches and let the world continually grow evil? Or are we supposed to get out there and do the work so that we can warn others about the impending judgment? That's obviously something that we are supposed to do. Same as Enoch, we are supposed to do that. And not all of us are great orators. Not all of us can be preachers and teachers like Nick, but everybody can do something to lead others to Christ around him. And sometimes even the most effective way to do that is not by your words, but by your actions, living in a way. There have been people that we have converted back in Cookeville just by, I remember one specific instance is that there was a man, he was in the Tennessee Tech marching band, and he saw Christians that worshiped with us. He saw the way they acted and how they were different. Now, it initially wasn't because they were talking to him about religious matters, spiritual matters, but he was initially drawn to them because he saw the way they acted. And everybody can do that. We may not be preachers like Nick, but we can all do our part. But unfortunately, at times we will probably face times where we will have to confront evil in one way or the other, whether it's hopefully not evil in our own lives, but evil of the world around us. And that's not an easy thing to do. In fact, I would opine that it's almost never an easy thing to do, but it's something that's required of us as Christians. Matthew 5 verses 14 through 16 says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." And that's the goal for every one of us as we go out into the world. We need to shine as lights. Again, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. If people aren't seeing Christ in our lives, we've got work to do, and that's more to me than it is to you, because I know I have work to do in that regard. That people need to see Christ in me. Maybe I need to be more vocal about it. Things like that to those in the world, and let people know why I have the hope that I have. So with that, just very quickly, conclusion for us tonight, like Enoch, and as we've talked about in Hebrews and Colossians, we must walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. If we're not walking in a manner worthy of the Lord, we are not going to find ourselves in a comfortable place come Judgment Day. So that's like Enoch. We need to focus on our walk and make sure that we're walking in that way. But again, as we talked about, the only way we're going to please God is if we have a proper faith. But that faith, in turn, is predicated, as we talked about, believing that God exists, that He is who He is, and believing that He rewards those who diligently seek Him. We can't forget that hope that we have. And so, again, like Enoch, we must confront and call out evil as difficult as that is. It's something we're all going to have to do at some point. We're all going to have to call out evil that's around us and let the world know why we believe what we believe and why we have the hope that we have. And then finally, we all just need to remember that no matter what happens on this earth, at the end of the day, what happens here on this physical earth, worldly accomplishments, it's all vanity. Solomon, who had everything a man could ask for on this earth, Solomon knew that. At the end of his life, he realized that it was all vanity. And, we will all, pretty much every one of us here will be forgotten, within probably a few decades, maybe not even a few generations, a few decades after we die. But God won't forget us. Like Enoch, God won't forget us. And that can be, obviously we've talked about that, God remembering us in a good way, but God's not going to forget us at all, even if we lived our lives in a way that may. Absolutely, yes. And that's, you're a lot younger than I am. I will tell you, that's not an easy thing to do. I was one that I thought as I got older, peer pressure would grow, would go away, and maybe it does. I would say I don't have the same temptations I had when I was in college or things like that. But it really, you're never going to have a time in your life where Satan just stops tempting you. And that's something we need to remember. The temptations may not be the same, but there will be temptations just the same. But just like Enoch, we can stay strong. We can continue to stand for the Lord, and we can be pleasing to God, so that we will be remembered on the day of judgment. And so, with that, I realize tonight I haven't talked much about the call to salvation, but everything we've talked about tonight is really based on the foundation of first, inherently, it's based on the foundation that we have to start our walk with Christ. And I don't know very many people here, but I hope y'all have all began that process by being baptized into Christ. If you've been going here, I know you've been hearing the word of God, and I hope you believe it. And if you have, and you've not been baptized, as blunt as this is to say, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good until you take that step to be baptized into Christ to wash away your sins. On the flip side of that, maybe you have. Some of you, maybe you've long decades upon decades have been involved in your walk with Christ, but maybe you haven't lived in a way that you should. Maybe those in the world haven't seen the attitudes or the actions out of you that you should be displaying as a Christian. And maybe you need the prayers of the saints here. And if you find yourself in that situation, I know the members here will be happy to pray for you and to seek forgiveness from God on your behalf. So with that, we would ask that you stand while we are led in our invitation song.